Thank you, guys. Hey, I get to wrap Momentum up here this year, and thankfully I get to do it in between dance parties, so this will be fun. But I want to talk to you guys a little bit about what we've experienced this week, and I want to talk to you a little bit about what we're going to kind of deal with as we go home. And so I'm grateful to be here. A lot of my family is here. Gabe and Heidi are at home. One of my sons and my wife is at home. But privileged to be here and privileged to get to be a part of this organization, be a part of your guys' lives. About 4 years ago or so, the board of Momentum came to me and asked if I would take leadership of this organization. And I said yes, if we could develop leaders, and if we could be a part of raising a generation of people who would know and love and follow Jesus. And if we could dedicate ourselves fully to that and kind of give our full-time attention, our full-time effort to that, then I would be excited to be a part of that. And so I'm grateful for that privilege and grateful to be here with you, right? And I want to talk to you about some of what we learned in this conference and some of the awesome things that God has done. When I was in college, many years ago, I had a friend that came to me one day, and he said, he goes, "Hey, Jeff, we're going to take a ski trip." Any of you guys ski, like snow ski? Anybody snow ski? Yeah. And so he asked me if I want to take a ski trip with the college. And so I said, okay. I said, that sounds like fun. All my friends were going, and we hopped on these buses, and we went up to Michigan to go skiing up there. And so it's a few-hour bus ride. We're riding up there. All of my friends were all hyped up. So they're all hyped up about skiing, all hyped up about telling me how much fun it is. So excited to be a part of it. We had a blast. We were talking, we were laughing, we were telling stories. It was great to be together. I had never skied before in my life, never been a part of it, never put skis on my feet, didn't know how to do it. But I thought to myself, if my friends can do it, then how hard can this be, right? I didn't have the brightest friends in the world. And so I thought, if they can do it, I can do it. So we get up to the ski resort and we get out of the bus, and my friends, they brought their own equipment. They had their own fancy skis and these ski outfits and all this kind of stuff. And so they kind of took off and kind of left me standing there. I was standing there in jeans and tennis shoes to go skiing. And they went off, and my one friend looked at me and he said, "Do you know what you're doing?" I said, kinda. I've seen other people ski. I watched the Olympics. How hard can all that stuff be? And I said, "Not really sure." He said, "You should probably take a ski lesson." So I thought, okay, that's a good idea. So I went over to this place where you take ski lessons. And I checked in and I said, "I'm here to take a ski lesson." And right away, the lady behind the counter looked at me really, really odd. Like something was wrong or different or weird. And I didn't know what to think of it. And so I was like, I just need to have a ski lesson. And so she said, "Well, what size boot do you wear?" And I didn't even know you wore ski boots. I didn't know anything about that. I didn't really know what she's talking about. So she helped me figure that out, and I put on these ski boots. If you never had them on before, you put them on, and you can't bend your ankles, so you walk funny in them. And then she said, "What size ski would you like?" And I'm like, "I don't know, whatever a man skis with, I don't know." And I said, I just give me some skis. And so she gave me some skis, and then she gave me these poles. She's like, "What kind of poles do you want? Do you want this kind of pole or that kind of pole?" I'm like, I don't know. Just give me some poles. Like this is way too complicated. So she gave me some poles. She gave me some skis. She gave me some boots. And she's like, "The ski lessons are over there." So I went over there, and when I got over there, I realized why she was looking at me funny, because it was me and 7 9-year-olds. Everybody knew how to ski except me. So it's me and the kids in this class. And the ski instructor comes out and he says, this is the basics of skiing. I'm like, okay. And he said, when you're going down the hill, you want to say centered over your skis. You want to say balance on your skis. And so I'm like, okay, how hard is that? I'm looking at the kids are trying to figure it out. I'm like, dumb kids, I'm in college. And so I'm like, how hard can this be? And then he said, he goes, when you turn, if you want to turn left, you lean on your right ski and you'll go left. And if you want to turn right, you lean on your left ski and you'll go right. And these dumb kids, they couldn't figure this out. These kids had public education. And so they didn't know what was going on. And so they were kind of falling over and I got to turn the thing down. And then he goes, if you're going down the hill and you want to slow down, what you want to do is you want to point your skis toward each other. It's called snow plowing. So you point your skis toward each other and it'll slow you down. But he goes, don't cross them. Don't cross them, because if you cross them, you will instantly die. That's what will happen. And so he's like, don't cross them or you'll flip over your skis. I'm like, okay. So we take this little lesson. I don't think much about it. I'm like, it's not that complicated. 9-year-old can do it. I can do it. I have, half of a college degree. I know everything. And so I thought, we're good to go. So the class let out, and I didn't really know where to go. I was like, well, what do you do now? And so all the kids went over to this one ski hill. And there's a lot of peer pressure by now. We've been in class together. And so I just followed the 9-year-olds over to the ski hill. And I'm standing there, I'm watching the 9-year-olds at the ski hill, and they would get on this ski lift, but it was a weird thing. It was just this rope that ran in this big loop, and they would go up to it, and they would put their poles in one hand and grab the rope with the other one, and they would just shoot up this hill. Well, it's more complicated than you think. These 9-year-olds started to show off. They're getting cocky. I was like, beefing with them a little bit. And so they're going up there. I finally figured it out. I got the rope and I went up the hill. As I got close to the top of the hill, when you got up to the hill, there was this neat little bunny that welcomed you. There was this sign and it was pink, had like rabbit ears, and it was like a bunny. And they said, this is the bunny hill. It's for bunnies, like little ski people who don't know how to ski. I was like, okay, great. I'm on the bunny hill. And I felt like giving the sign a hug, I was like, here I am on the bunny hill. And I get up on the bunny hill, and the kids just turn and shoot down the hill. I turned and went down the hill, and the first time down, I was a little bit wobbly, and I was trying to lean right and go left and go right and snow plow and doing all this kind of stuff. Well, then the kids, we just kept going up the hill. Kids started getting cocky. I mean, really, they had attitudes, pretty big attitudes for a 9-year-old. And so they get up there, they're skiing in between me. And so as I got more confident, I started to compete with the kids. They'd ski in between me. I'd smack one with my pole, poked one in the eye, just stuff like that. They'd cry and I'd be like, little bunny, and so we were just going back and forth, and so I'm hitting kids, running them over, got to the end. Instead of trying to stop, I just plow into them, As a group, they're a pretty good airbag, and so I was just kind of having fun that way. So finally, this guy comes over, and he's like, hey, you're an adult. You can't run children over. And I was like, well, aren't we snotty up here in Michigan? And so I'm like, whatever. He goes, you need to go to like an adult hill. This is a children's hill. And I was like, okay. And that's all he said. And then he left. He just walked out. It was over. Like one of Taylor Swift's relationships, just gone. And so I'm standing there figuring out what to do. I know. Let's be honest. Nobody knows who's going to break it to Travis, but this isn't going to last long, is it? So he goes, and I'm standing there, and I don't really know what to do. So in my mind, this is what I thought. I thought, it seems like the thing you would do is go to the next biggest hill, right? So I thought, well, what's the next biggest hill? So I look over, and there's another hill over there, and people are going up that hill. So I go over that hill, and this hill has a different chairlift. This lift has, it comes down, it's like a stick with a Frisbee on the end of it. And what people would do is they'd grab that stick and then they would throw their leg over and they'd ride the Frisbee up the hill. Now that's way more complicated than you think it is. But I finally figured out how to ride the Frisbee up the hill. And I'm riding up the hill and I'm kind of noticing the hill. On one side of the hill is the stick with the Frisbees that I'm riding. On the other side of the hill is like the woods. But somebody had like trimmed the trees and just left like wooden daggers where the branches used to be. So you pretty quickly realize if I go into the one side of the hill, I'm going to run into people. If I go to the other side of the hill, I'm going to be impaled by trees. And I was like, that's interesting boundary markers. And I go up the hill. As I go up the hill, I'm looking for the fuzzy animal because I'm thinking it's probably another bunny, but that's a kid's hill. I don't know, like a moose, bear, a yak, something like some fuzzy animal is going to welcome you up here. But as I got to the top of the hill, all I saw was this black diamond. And under the black diamond, all it said under the black diamond is, if your name's Jeff Bogue, you're going to die soon. That's like all that it said. So I get up there, I see the black diamond. That's like a skull and crossbones over it. And I'm thinking to myself, I'm like, this is probably not where I should be. You know, I want to go back and beat the children up. Like, I don't want to be on this hill. So as I am thinking that thing through, the stick and the Frisbee thing like threw me off of it. And it threw me off of it, and skis are hard to stop on because they're slick. And so I kind of went to the side, and I was kind of looking around at the black diamond. I was trying not to go down the hill, but I was having trouble keeping my balance. And I got to the hill, and I got to look down it just enough to see that the hill had all kinds of bumps in it. And I didn't know what a mogul hill was, do you? A mogul hill is where some moron puts bumps on the hill on purpose so people can do backflips and tricks and things like that. Nobody told me that in ski class. I didn't know about that. And so I'm at the top of the hill, kind of unsteady because it was steep. I'm trying to hold myself steady. I'm thinking about the black diamond, thinking this is a bad thing. And then I'm thinking there's bumps, and I don't want to go over bumps. I don't think in the right place. I think I should get off this hill. I don't know if someone pushed me or if there was a hurricane. I'm not sure what happened. But as I'm standing there, I started to realize I am going down the hill. And I started going down the hill, and as you start down the hill, I'm starting to pick up steam and speed a lot faster than I did on the bunny hill. And before I know it, I am flying down the hill. And as I'm flying down the hill, I realize that in front of me, there's a bump. And I was like, I do not want to go off the bump. I don't want to go flying off the bump. And so I'm trying to remember what happened in my ski class with the 9-year-olds. And the guy said, if you want to turn, and I wanted to turn, you should lean on your right ski and go left. So I did. And when I did that, I shot sideways, and I was going to shoot into the sticks and Frisbees. And there was mothers and children and puppies on it. And I'm like, I'm going to kill somebody and myself. I don't want to do that. So I leaned on my left one and I went right, and now I'm going toward the trees with the daggers on it. And I thought, I don't want to be shish kebab. Like, I don't want to be impaled. I don't want this to happen. So I tried to snow plow and slow myself down. That just doesn't work. The guy's a liar. Don't believe it. It's out of the pit of hell. And so I'm snow plowing, nothing's happening. Then I start to lose my balance. And I remember that the guy said, if you lose your balance, get over the centers of your ski. So I'm back and forth trying to slow down, losing my balance, and I'm starting to fall down. And so what I did to get over the centers of my ski is I jerked myself forward. Now the timing was unfortunate because I jerked myself forward right when I went off the bump. And when I went off the bump and jerked myself forward, I did about 3/4 of a flip and just landed on my face. Like, I rode my face down the mountain. And I hit my face, my poles flew, they're with Jesus. They were never found, they were raptured. It was amazing. My skis popped off. I'm just riding my face down the mountain, and it crushed like my ribs. And all this happened at once. And I go flying down the mountain. I kind of went over another bump, but like slowly, like that. And I'm laying at the bottom of the other bump, and everybody got quiet. All the people on the Frisbees, everybody that was jumping off the bumps got quiet. And I'm just laying there, and I hear this lady go, "Is he dead? Is he dead?" And I didn't want him to think I was dead because I needed help, but it knocked the wind out of me. You ever had the wind knocked out of you? So I wanted to respond, and she was like, is he dead? And I wanted to call out for help, but all I could do was go, and the lady's like, oh, he's fine. I'm like moose were coming in from the woods. They thought I was calling it. So I'm laying there, and they got these people that are called ski patrols. Worthless. They don't help at all. And the ski patrol person skis up to me, and he's like, sir, are you dead? I'm like, He said, sir, can you say your name? Well, I had hit my face and then skied it down the mountain. So my lip, my face, and my tongue were swollen. So he's like, can you say your name? I was like, no. And he's like, sir, do you have brain damage? He called over another ski patrol. This lady came, and she's like, sir, do you have anything broken? She was the kindest lady. She bent down, and she scooped me up in her arms. She was a large woman, and she scooped me up in her arms, and she skied me down like in a lullaby all the way down to the snow lodge. And so I'm in the lodge, and I'm sitting there, and my friends show up, and they're like, are you okay? I think, and they were like, do you think you'll recover? And they looked at me and they said, do you want to go back out? I my faith. And that was the last time I ever went skiing. Never got again in my life. Listen, we've had a great week. And as I was thinking back about the week, we have understood God's forgiveness in a new way. It's awesome. We have understood God's grace in a new way. It's awesome. We've understood his presence, like when Pastor Lav talked about abiding in God in a new way. It's awesome. And we talked about God's Great Commission. Willie talked about it. Mark talked about it last night. We talked about the Great Commission, the need to tell other people of Jesus' love and forgiveness in his presence. There's one more thing I want to talk to you about, and I think it's important, and I want us to wrestle through it a little bit here tonight before we have fun and we finish our conference. Here's my observation. You ready? You ready? Most of us follow Jesus on the bunny hill. It's fun, it's easy, successful, not a big deal. But my observation is that the first time we face plant and get the wind knocked out of us, we decide that we will do whatever is necessary to avoid ever having that experience again. And we get in situations where we're all talk. And when it gets hard, and when it gets lonely, and when it requires self-discipline and self-control and sacrifice, we'll sit in the ski lodge kind of beat up and bloodied and say, I'm never, ever doing that again. I was looking at my notes because I didn't want to repeat this story to people who hadn't heard it. And I realized that for almost the last 10 years, I've given a talk like this on the last night of Momentum, where I've had to look at you and say, if you are all talk and do not find your grit and do not find your courage, your generation will be lost to the gospel. There's an interesting picture of this in the Bible. If you got it, open up to Numbers chapter 13. Numbers chapter 13. I like to use the New Living Translation. So let me explain who these guys are. These guys are the Israelites, or God's chosen people. These are the guys that were in Egypt, right? This group of people, the generation, they were in Egypt, and God sent a guy named Moses. Moses did a bunch of miracles, and we call them the plagues. The Pharaoh finally kicked them out. They were in bondage and slavery for 400 years, and Moses finally kicked them, or the Pharaoh kicked them out. Moses led them out. Egypt was the superpower of its day. It was the United States of America. It was the military superpower of its day. When the Pharaoh kicked them out, they took off. Pharaoh sent his whole army after these people. They got to a sea, God parted it, they crossed. These guys are the people who ate manna. These guys are the saw God be a pillar of fire. These guys are the guys that saw all of that happen and they were freed. There was probably not another group or generation of people that saw more miracles than this group or generation of people did. No one really has seen the power of God on display as much as these people have seen the power of God. And the whole idea was that you get out of Egypt and you get freedom. You get freedom from your bondage, freedom from your chains, freedom from the things that are oppressing you. You get healing. Healing from your pain, healing from your past, healing from your dysfunction, even forgiveness, because for the first time in hundreds of years, they're able to freely practice their interaction with God. So these folks had it all. And the deal was that they were going to go from Egypt to a place that God called the Promised Land. And he said, in the Promised Land, this is the thing. In the Promised Land is going to be momentum 24/7. I'm going to provide for you. I'm going to interact with you. I'm going to bless you. I'm going to protect you. All you have to do is trust me. And so they run from Egypt. And where we find them in Numbers chapter 13 is we find that they are on the edge of the Promised Land. And so what Moses did on the edge of the Promised Land is he sent 12 guys in to spy out the Promised Land. And they go in and they spy out the Promised Land. And what they find is they find that it is really everything that God had promised. Verse 25, chapter 13 of Numbers, after exploring the land for 40 days, they reported to the whole community that what they had seen, and they showed them the fruit that they had taken from the land. And then there was a report to Moses. We entered the land that you sent us to explore, and it is, look at it, indeed a bountiful country, a land flowing with milk and honey. In other words, every promise God made, it's legit. We saw it. We saw his miracles. We saw his power, and now we see his promise. It's flowing with milk and honey. But, verse 28, the people living there are powerful, and their towns are large and fortified. We even saw giants there. And they come back and they look at Moses and they look at a generation who had experienced the freedom, the healing, the salvation of God. And they say everything God promised is true. It's full of milk and honey. It's full of blessing. And we all agree on that, all 12 of us. It's also full of giants and full of danger, and it's a little bit scary. And all 12 of us agree on that. Everybody agreed that the promises were legit and the problems were legit. Nobody was arguing about either one of those things. The argument started when it came to the question of whether we trust God or whether we're just all talk. What do we do? What do we do? We know the promises are legit. God will heal you, free you, help you, save you. Boom, done. And we know there's giants and problems and struggles and strife and the things that we have to deal with. Boom, done. But what do we do? The Bible says that two of them, Caleb and Joshua, said, let's go conquer it. Remember the plagues? Remember manna? Remember the parting of the sea wiped out the super? Remember all that? I mean, this is just a giant or two. Like, let's go conquer it. Caleb and Joshua were all in. And the rest of the guys said, no way. And the Bible says this in chapter 14. Caleb and Joshua said, let's conquer it. The other 10 said, we can't go up against them. It's bigger than our God. And in chapter 14, the Bible says that the whole community began weeping aloud. They cried all night. They began to protest Moses and his brother Aaron. They complained. They asked, why is the Lord taking us to the country only to have us die in battle? They were convinced that God was going to abandon them. They plotted against Moses and Aaron to go back to slavery. That was their big plan. The superpower that's really honked off now because of all the miracles. Let's go back there. That was their plan. And everything that God promised, and everything that God invited them to, and everything that God had done was lost. And they couldn't and wouldn't trust it. God looked at the people, and God said to Moses, how long will these people treat me with contempt? Will they never believe me even after all the miraculous signs I have done for them? Ready? It was at this point that God said to a generation, I've done miracles, I've saved you, I freed you, I invited you, I healed you, I gave you peace, I gave you power, I made you anew, I gave you everything that you ever needed or wanted. And now it's time to take your emotions and your words and your thoughts and your commitments and just trust me. And they complained and they protested and they were afraid and they were fearful and they refused. And it was at that point that God looked at a generation and he said, okay, I'm going to let you have your way. You want free from your past, but you're terrified to embrace your future, so you're going to live in a spiritual limbo. And for 40 years, that group of people wandered around the wilderness until that generation died. And the only two people that were left were Caleb and Joshua. The two who believed all along that God could do the impossible. I've been telling you for almost a decade that your generation is going to have to understand and learn to live with persecution. I've been saying for a decade that if you can't endure, if you can't proclaim the gospel, if you can't make the gospel make sense to your generation, that your generation is lost. Because there's very, very few people in your generation that would ever find the salvation, the help, and the healing, and the motivation of the cross of Jesus Christ. If you can't find it. And so we've talked a lot about courage, and we talked a lot about taking a hit. You have to be a generation that moves beyond talk. And you have to learn to pull yourself up past past your pain, in spite of your energies, and you've got to learn to ski on the mountain of God's calling in your life. You are probably the most wounded generation. You are the most abandoned generation. Nobody has been more beat up and hit, and the core foundational pieces of your soul. You've been raised on pornography. You've been taught that perversion is normal and healthy. Every question against God's word is in the palm of your hand on your phone. And yet here you are, a generation that's been attacked, a generation that's been persecuted, a generation that's been pushed against, and you're the same people that were here worshiping at the foot of the cross, believing in God's grace, trying to get a hold of God's healing, responding even to God's call. And you are the last generation in our culture that even has a memory of what it would have been like when the power and the presence of God was more defined and clearly presented around you. You're it. Soon enough, your life is going to be proven out, your personal life. You're hopping on those buses tonight and tomorrow, and before you know it, it's football camp, band camp, school, family, college. Soon enough, all the wonder of the rest of your life is in front of you, and all the giants of the rest of your life is in front of you. And in your history, at least this week, you've seen the power and the presence of God. So soon enough, you're going to be standing at the edge of what God is calling you to, and you're going to have to decide if you're going to make the choices that Joshua and Caleb made, or if you're just going to be one of the nameless, faceless 10 who wandered and died out and missed out on the promises of God. Now listen, you with me? Students, you can't be all talk. You can't be all talk. You can't worship Jesus at Momentum and then deny him in your bedroom with your phone. You can't be all talk. You can't raise your hands in worship and quiet your voice with your friends. You can't be all talk. You can't tell God that you'll surrender everything and then sneak off into your secret life. Sit together as a couple and fake it at church. And then have a whole nother secret thing that nobody would ever suspect. You can't be all talk. You can't promise to be the light of the world and not even tell the people you see every day that the love of Jesus is greater than their sin. You can't sing of the greatness of God and never face your fear. Just decide that you have anxiety and I'm just gonna have to tuck up and survive the rest of my life. See, you can't enjoy and know and see and participate in the miracles and the power and the promise of God that you have enjoyed and seen and participated in at least this week. And then have God take you to the place that he wants to take you and decide that all that's irrelevant and complain and protest and plot. Because if you do, your generation will be lost. If the first time you wipe out on that mountain, You make a decision to live defeated. You decide that your identity is the identity of brokenness. You allow yourself to be defined by your diagnosis. I love what Brittany said today. She said, I live with my struggles. I don't suffer from them. How did she say that? What does she mean? What she meant was, I got problems, but they don't define me. And the first time you face plant, you decide, I'm never skiing again. Then your generation will be lost. Now, some of you hear me say this in the room and even online, and you're gonna look at me and say, Jeff, I don't know if you know what you're talking about. I'm like, well, first of all, if you're gonna treat me that way, then it's Dr. Bogue. Jeff, they're just kids. Don't tell me that. I'm not gonna do what I do and make the sacrifices I make to babysit teenagers for a week, because you're not just kids. I don't remotely believe that. When God needed a nation saved from a giant, he sent a teenager out with a slingshot and a rock. When God wanted an empire stood up to, he sent 3 teenagers out, 4, Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego, and Daniel. When God wanted his people saved, he sent Esther, a teenager, in to do the saving of a whole group of people. When God wanted his word to become flesh, he asked Mary to carry that child. Don't tell me you're just kids. I don't believe that. God doesn't believe that. And it's wildly important that you don't just believe that. Youth pastors, leaders, listen. Games and pizza aren't going to cut it anymore. You know what they're facing because you're searching for the answers too. It is, in my opinion, I've been a pastor for 31 years. In my opinion, this time period we're in, hands down, bar none, no exceptions, is the hardest time period to be a youth leader, youth pastor, bar none. And games and overnighters and fun is not how you take the promised land, and it's not how you fight giants. You have to teach the word of God so that these young people can learn how to wield the sword of the Lord, the sword of truth. It's got to be deeper. It's got to be stronger. It's got to be more. You have to train them to use the shield of their salvation, because everything they experienced here this week is going to be attacked about the time you get on the bus. And you know that. And you're going to have to walk them through it. You're going to have to lead them into the promised land and teach them how to achieve victory there, because they trust the miracles of God and they've never squared off with a real giant before. They think a big part of their life is giants, and you know that that changes dramatically. And you can't be all talk. You can't say that you're going to equip and shape young people and then be afraid to challenge them. You can't say that the most important information in the world is in this book and then never teach it or learn how to teach it. You can't look at a kid and say, you know what, you gotta love Jesus so much you'll forsake their father, your own father and mother, and then you be scared to death of their father and mother. We can't be all talk. And I know that leadership is hard, and I know it's frustrating, and I know it's personally taxing to your soul. And I know that there are times when we're laying on the mountain of the calling, of our calling, and we're in pain and we're out of breath and we're beaten and we're exhausted and we feel like Moses and we feel like Aaron because we're being accused, because we're being complained against, because we're being plotted against. Look at me, youth leader, pastor, look at me. That's the gig. We don't battle against flesh and blood, principalities, powers, forces of this dark realm. When we signed up for this, we signed up for a fight. And when it feels like a fight, there's nothing unusual happening. And if you won't get in between these kids and that world, who will? You know how things work now? The agendas that they face when they go into classrooms? It's the gig. And it's a tough gig. And you're gonna face plant, and it's gonna hurt. And sitting in the ski lodge refusing to get back on the hill is not an option. Parents, well, you're watching online, if you're in the room, you have to do two things. You have to model what it means to not be all talk. When your life blows up and your dream dies and you feel like you just got plastered on the side of the mountain, you have to model strength and grit, trust, hope. You have to model what it's like to share your faith. Mom and dad, where are your stories of evangelism? Who are your three that you're praying for? Why isn't that a part of the family dynamic? You have to model. Where are your radical acts of faith, your radical acts of forgiveness, your radical acts of love? They're willing. Sometimes we have to show them. Parents, you got to model, and then you got to release them. You got to release them. It's easy to say that my kids belong to the Lord until your kid gets bullied for their faith, and then suddenly it feels like they belong to you. It's easy to say my kids belong to the Lord until they feel called to something. It's real easy to say, I want my kids to follow Jesus, until your baby girl follows Jesus across the world. And suddenly, as a mom and a dad, you got to figure out if you're all talk or not. Or if you believe that the promise of God's calling is greater for them than the security of your home. You have to release them. You have to let them struggle with the consequences of their sin so that they can be matured and completed, not lacking anything. That's one of the hardest things you ever do. Students, pastors, leaders, parents, if as a generation we are all talk, then as a generation, all will be lost. A decade ago, when I started talking about this, it sounded theoretical. Now, just another Monday. And there is a land of people desperate for the gospel. And there is the people of God on the edge of that land. And there is a land of God's calling that is flowing with blessing, greatest joy, most fulfilling life, purpose, meaning, contentment, finding my space. And there's a group of people on the edge of that land who have experienced the supernatural, who know the promises of God, and agree that the land is bountiful, and agree that it's full of giants, and just have to decide if they're going in or not. 40 years later, that whole generation died out. And in Joshua chapter 1, 40 years later, Joshua and Caleb, the only ones that lived through it, they're back into the land they wanted to go into 40 years ago. And God looks at Joshua and he says, Joshua, Moses has died of old age. You're in charge. Verse 3, I promised you what I promised Moses. The land's still there. Still got milk and honey. Still got giants. But it's there. So I promise you what I promised Moses. Wherever you set your feet, you will be on the land that I have given you. No one will be able to stand against you as long as you live. For I will be with you as I was with Moses. I will not fail you or abandon you. And the same God that promised Moses is the same God that promised Joshua, is the same God that promises you. There it is. It's yours. I won't abandon you. I won't fail you. You want to go in or not? Then the Lord looked at Joshua and said this, be strong. Be strong. Be courageous. Because you are the one who will lead these people to possess the land of promise. Look at me. Look at me. Students, you got to find your courage. You got to find your courage. Because there's nothing easy that you're going to go home to. There's nothing easy that God has called you to. God's never called anybody to anything easy. It's not the gig. So you got to find your courage. You're going to face plant. Everybody face plants. But when you fail, when somebody sweeps your legs out from under you and you get the wind knocked out of you, you got to find your courage. And when you sit down in that ski lodge and you can breathe again and you can see again, you have to make a fundamental, courageous decision that I'm going to get up, put the skis back on, and go master what I have to master. You got to find your courage. You got to be strong. Pastor, youth leader, you got to find your courage. You got to find your courage. You're going to get hit so hard. You're going to get hit so often. You're going to get blindsided. You're going to never know what was coming. It's going to be unbelievable what people are going to do to you, say of you, what they're going to accuse you of, how they're going to plot against you. It's going to blow your mind. It's the gig. Jesus calls it sharing in his sufferings. And you got to find your courage. You know how many people are getting out, running away, done. And if there is not a generation of youth leaders who find their courage and strength to lead the youth who are trying to find their courage and strength, then the generation is lost. Mom and Dad, you got to find your courage. You got to find your courage. It's hard. It's really hard. Because we were taught to make our kids' pain go away. We were taught to protect them above all else. It goes against every instinct in us to have our kids far, to have our kids at risk, and to have our kids go through pain. And if we don't model it, if you can't do it, how are they ever going to do it? You got to find your courage, church. And the God who will not abandon is the God who will not fail. And he is the God who invites us into the promised land of his calling. This is what I decided to do to end our conference. We're not going to have an invitation tonight. We're not going to come up front. I like that, and I think it's important, but sometimes I think we can talk people into things that they don't mean. So we're not going to do that. I'm just going to invite you to act. I'm just going to invite you to act, right? I can't help you in every way here at the youth conference. A lot of what you need to do winds up in your local church. But there's 3 ways that I can try to help you and orient you, and these are the 3 things that we've been talking about all week, okay? I can help you, and Momentum can help you when it comes to discovering your calling in the marketplace. You've heard us talking about this all week. So I'm going to ask you a question, and then I'm going to ask you to text something in. If this week you've seen God work in your life and you say, I feel called, I want to understand. You're not signing up for anything, you're not joining the military. You're just looking and saying, I want to understand. I want to look in there. I see that God can use me in the marketplace. I don't know how to fight that giant, but I'm willing to go into that land. If you feel like God has called you to go into the vein or the pathway of being what we call a missional marketplace leader, if that is something God has spoken to you about clearly this week, I just want you to stand up. Don't clap for them. Just stand up right now. Stand up where you're at. Okay? And you look and say, I want to be the teacher. I want to be the business person. I want to be the tradesman. That's what I want to do. That's what I feel God has called me to do. And when I think about school, and I think about college, and I think about trade school, career school, whatever I do, I want to do it in such a way that God can use me in the marketplace. Just stand up. Stand up, okay? Okay? Now, this is all I want you to do. I'm going to pray for you, and then I want you to act. So the only way that I can help you with that is by helping to train you in marketplace stuff. So I'm going to pray for you, and then I'm going to have you text in market to the number on the screen. And we're going to start to walk beside you along with your youth leader and get you ideas and resources and articles and things like that. And all I want you to do is read them, pray about them, talk to your youth leader. Just start acting. Nobody expects you to go slay the marketplace right now. But you go into the promised land one step at a time. Does that make sense? Jesus, for these men and women that are standing and want to be used by you in their marketplace calling, whatever it is, God, they have experienced you. They have worshiped you. They have prayed. They have surrendered. You have freed them. You've started to heal them. You go before them. You help them. So God, as they're standing at this place where they have seen your miracles, but also understand your promise, would you help them to be strong and courageous? Strong and courageous, and to move forward. Bless them, Jesus, unique way. In your name, amen. You can sit down. Guys, if you stood up, get your phone, text market. We'll help you with it. Ready? Second group. Gonna give 3. Second thing I can help with. Some of you feel called into full-time ministry. There is a desperate need for full-time ministers. Only 16% of pastors in North America are under the age of 40. 85% of all pastors in North America will be of retirement age in the next 4 years. The number one thing that's going to result from that is churches are going to close all across the country because there's nobody to be a pastor. Missions agencies are going to pull back their footprint across the world because there's nobody to be a missionary. Things like homeless ministries, other stuff, all the full-time Christian workers who do ministry vocationally, all that's going to retract because there's simply nobody to do it. And I'm asking you, if God has interacted with you this week in a unique way, not a higher way, not a higher, marketplace and ministry is just different things, not better, different. But if God has interacted with you in a unique way, and you say, Jeff, I've been forgiven, I've been healed, I've been helped, I feel called, I'll go into that promised land. I don't know what I'm doing. I got to get my education and get my training. Nobody's asking you to conquer anything or be the senior pastor of a church. You're just willing to step into it and willing to receive help from it. If God is calling you to full-time ministry and you feel that right now in your life, you're not signing up, just right now, I want you to stand up if that is what God's calling you to do. Okay. And you see it. Full-time ministry is a wonderful way to live. It's a horrible way to make a living. The most joy, meaning, fulfillment you'll ever experience, along with the most pain, rejection, and abandonment that you'll ever experience. There's fruit and there's giants. So Jesus, I pray for these men and women. God, you have uniquely called them. And they're sensing that, God. They're trying to understand it. And so, God, would you cement into their heart? Would you let them remember that calling, God? Because if you've called them, it's going to boil down to that again and again and again. It's a tough gig, but a wonderful one. So, God, would you give them a vision? And would you give them help? And would you surround them with pastors and other leaders who, just like marketplace mentors, ministry mentors, would help them understand that path. Work in their hearts in a powerful way, Jesus. In your name. All right, you can be seated. Now here's the action I want you to take. I want you guys to text the word ministry to the number on the screen. Get your phone out right now and do it. It's this. We'll come along beside you. We'll help you connect. We'll help you find mentors if you don't already have one. It's what I can do for you. And we want to do that for you. And we'll surround you as you take that path. Text market, text ministry. You're just taking action instead of feeling and being all talk. Now here's the last thing, and then the band will come out. The other night we talked about praying for our 3. Here's what I mean by that. I think it's important that every person who's a follower of Jesus Christ, who's experienced the salvation of Christ, the healing of Christ, the forgiveness of Christ, the restoration of Christ, we have to tell this story. You cannot be silent. And you can tell it face to face. You can tell it through a podcast. You can tell it. There's a million. Your generation is the most creative, unbelievably creative people I've ever met in my life. You're also the most accepting people I've ever met in my life. It's your superpowers. You're amazing with it. And through that acceptance and through that creativity, you got to tell people. You got to tell people. So here's the deal. Pray for your 3. This is what that means. Think of 3 people that are already in your life, and you're going to pray for them by name every day. Just write them on your windshield, write them on your mirror, write them on your face. I don't care what you do, but keep that name in front of you, those 3 people, every day by name. And this is what you're going to pray. God, would you help me to have a no-brainer opportunity to tell them for the reason, for the hope that's within me? And you're going to do fish, and you're going to use God talk, and you're just going to wait. You're not going to be obnoxious. You're not going to be rude, always with gentleness and respect. But you're going to look for opportunities to tell those 3 people that you know and love about what you experience from God, the miracles of God you experience at Momentum. Now, ready? If you will, and don't do this because everybody else is doing it, but if you'll look to God, don't look to me, look to God and say, God, I will actually do that. I will pray, you will create an opportunity, and when you do, I'll step into that promised land. I'll share my story. I'll tell them about the summer. I'll let them know what is going on my. If you will pray for your 3, I just want you to stand up right now. Okay? I want you to catch this. That should mean that from this conference, 6,000 to 7,000 people should hear about the good news of Jesus. You understand what I'm saying? And I would say to you, we're just a small sliver of dirt and a small slice of time in a little part of the world. But if 6,000 or 7,000 people actually heard about Jesus, it's our part of changing the direction of a generation. But you can't be all talk. Once you stay in your seat, stay standing. Those of you who, by the way, really appreciate your honesty. But if everybody wants to stand, I want to pray for you guys. The band's going to take us into worship. We're not going to come up front. We'll do that in a little bit. We're going to have a blast. But I want us to capture one last moment here together with our Lord, not with each other, but with our Lord as we worship him. Right? Jesus, we love you. We thank you. You've helped us, you've healed us, you've saved us, you've called us. God, this is the beginning, it's not the end. It's a part of a process, it's not closure of it all that stuff. But you have met us. And so God, as we get ready to leave this conference and go out to that mountain, we are going to fail, but you restore us. 3 or 4 pastors told us that this week. We're going to sin, but you're going to call us out from under the table because you ran the fence for us, like Pastor Dan said. We're going to have wounds, but we can live with our wounds and not be defined by them, like Eric and Brittany said. So God, you've taught us all this, and we've experienced it. And so God, with the sincerity, the genuine sincerity that we can offer to you, we now worship you and we commit ourselves, God, to these callings and these commitments that you've drawn us to. We love you, Jesus.